Welcome back to Dentro La Storia. Today we've decided to take a closer look at an event that, on this very day, celebrates an anniversary, an important anniversary. It's been 34 years. It was February 17, 1992, when the world, or rather the Italian microcosm, changed radically from that moment on. From that date on, nothing would ever be the same again. We would start talking about the Second Republic. We would start talking about justice applied to politics. We would start talking about a topic that was almost taboo until then, a topic commonly known as kickbacks, bribes. The money, obviously undeclared and in cash, passed from businessmen to politicians. To get favors, to have quicker access to bidding procedures, to outmaneuver their competitors in the same tenders, to curry favor with whoever was in power at the time. A corrupt practice that certainly didn't start in 1992. It didn't start on that day, but on that day, it came to light in all its power, in all its tragic scope. And from that moment, everything changed. It changed our perception of the public, and it even changed much of our Italian politics. That day, February 17, 1992, Tangentopoli was born. And today, we at Dentro La Storia have decided to delve deeper into that story. The story of the first bribe and everything that came before and happened after, to understand how our world has changed. On February 17, 1992, as we were saying, everything changes in the world. What happens? An arrest takes place in Milan, the Milan to drink, the great metropolis of the north, but it's a rather strange arrest. First of all, because it takes place within the walls of the Pio Albergo. Trivulzio, a charitable organization that basically takes care of the elderly, of elderly minors. It is an organization that for several years, exactly since 1986, for 6 years, was presided over by a man named Mario Chiesa, a politician, a company executive graduated in electrical engineering from the Polytechnic University of Milan, a member of the Italian Socialist Party. For 6 years, Mario Chiesa is the Pio Albergo Trivulzio, and as the manager of what should be a charitable institution, he behaves in an absolutely unscrupulous way, running a bribery scheme because even charitable organizations need suppliers. They need maintenance. Mario Chiesa knows that everyone does it. To paraphrase a famous work by Mozart, and he goes along with it. He asks for bribes, he asks for kickbacks, he asks for envelopes of cash from whom? From everyone who wants to work with the Pio Albergo Trivulzio. One of them is a small businessman. His name is Luca Magni. He runs a small cleaning company, and he wants to make sure he wins the contract for cleaning the nursing home. Initially, the relationship between Magni and Chiesa is excellent, but something breaks down. Chiesa becomes increasingly greedy for money and keeps raising his demands. After a while, Magni gets tired. He can't go on like this anymore, so he goes to the Milan courthouse and talks to a magistrate. His name is still Antonio Di Pietro. That magistrate is not very well known yet. Magni goes to report. Mario Chiesa accepts Antonio Di Pietro's proposal to orchestrate the delivery of a new bribe, simply to set someone up. The president of the Pio Albergo Trivulzio. It's February 17, 1992. At the handover of the bribe, the handcuffs also snap shut. It's something historic. It had never happened before, at least in Milan. From that arrest, the so-called clean hands investigation begins, which later leads to what will be called Bribesville. The arrest is something shocking, both for Chiesa and especially for the world of politics, the Italian Socialist Party, to which Chiesa belongs. He is expelled by the secretary of the Socialist Party himself, Bettino Craxi, on March 3, 1992, that is a couple of weeks after the arrest. Interviewed by TG3, he describes Mario Chiesa as a crook, an isolated crook, a loose cannon. According to Bettino Craxi, the entire Socialist Party, and especially the Milan branch, is made up of honest people, of impeccable virtue. Chiesa, he simply took advantage of a position he had obtained thanks to his friendship, first with Carlo Tognoli and then with Paolo Piliteri, who, among other things, was related to Craxi and was the mayor of Milan. But is that really the case? Is Mario Chiesa really someone who made a mistake, who took advantage of political friendships, of roles guaranteed by politics, Is Mario Chiesa really an isolated case? Maybe that's not the case. So we need to go back a bit in time to understand what happened. Because the real problem, at the root of everything, was the relationship between politics, the parties, and the world of economics and finance. A political party has costs. You can't do politics with charity, and you can't do it for free either. Not only because politicians are citizens who make themselves available, offering their time to the administration of public affairs, and therefore they need to be paid. Also because parties are like peers, where many people coexist and work, and they certainly can't do it pro bono. Starting in 1974, the Italian Republic introduced public funding for political parties. It was an attempt to reduce the party's dependence on private sources and thus to avoid lobbying activities that could influence the party's decisions in Parliament. And not only that, what was supposed to be a tool for moralization and transparency, but in reality it didn't solve anything at all, because illegal funding continued, and real and alleged scandals kept coming to light. Think about Rovelli, the king of Italian chemistry, whose checks in favor of the Andreotti faction of the Christian Democrats, the Primavera faction, even ended up published on the front page. OPI, Public Political Observatory, by Milo Pecorelli. We've already discussed Milo Pecorelli in another video on the channel. The Christian Democrats, the Socialist Party, but also all the other parties, they all receive funding. Funding that was not always declared and most of the time under the table, illegal, off the books, funds that shouldn't have existed. Many parties were also in debt to the banks. Roberto Calvi's Banco Ambrosiano, between the late 1970s and the very beginning of the 1980s, had current accounts opened in favor of certain parties, including the Socialist Party itself, which had a significant exposure to Ambrosiano. And it was precisely during that period that the UBS Protezione account was created in Switzerland, simply to create a channel through which they could try to return funds to Ambrosiano. Part of the sums that had been paid to the Socialist Party, as we know, the Protezione account later became something else. But let's get back to the illegal financing a few months later. From the arrest of Mario Chiesa, it's July 3, 1992, in a speech at the Chamber of Deputies. It's Bettino Craxi himself, the same Bettino Craxi who had disowned Mario Chiesa, who says this: "Everyone knows that a significant part of political funding is irregular or illegal." At that moment, Craxi was just trying to defend himself from the accusations that were raining down on him. It was a defensive statement, but whether he wanted to or not, Craxi, with those words, ended up uncovering the whole thing. Pandora admitted the existence, according to Craxi, of a shared system that was part of an established practice. It wasn't just a single crook, as Craxi had said on that occasion, the loose cannon. Craxi had been forced to take it all back. The point of no return for bribes had been in the 1980s. At that time, the Italian state played a central role in the economy. Think about Leary, that great conglomerate created by Alberto Veneduce, which we've already talked about. You can find the video on the channel about rescuing bankrupt companies, and that had actually become a public boondoggle, denounced by many as an example of inefficiency and waste. Large public bodies, state-owned companies, infrastructure projects, all enormous resources. And in this context, where major resources were managed directly or indirectly by politics and parties, corruption had become an informal mechanism for regulating the relationship between politics and business. On this subject, the jurist Sabino Cassesi noted that corruption thrives when the administration has broad discretion and when oversight is weak. It was a perfect picture, but there's another factor to add to our little equation. We've mentioned political parties, public funding, control of large conglomerates, big companies, and public works. There's still one more factor missing in the Tangentopoli equation to understand why it led to collapse. And that's another collapse, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. We've already talked about this as well. The fall of the Berlin Wall is an event that marks the end of a regime of international balance. The capitalist world against the socialist world. Of course, there was also the third world, but it wasn't taken into account. And it was precisely on this constant confrontation that the Italian political system was based from 1946 until the early 1990s. That collapse of the Berlin Wall, the crumbling of socialist power in the East, and, after a while, even the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the strategic reasons that had guaranteed the permanence and power of those parties, which for over 40 years had divided up the seats, the positions, and, of course, the spoils, had disappeared. Let's go back then to February 17, 1992. The day of Mario Chiesa's arrest. Mario Chiesa is handcuffed. It's something traumatic, and little by little more is discovered. Chiesa is kept in prison for 5 weeks. It's a new method. It's the method to pressure the suspect. It will become a practice, even denounced by some politicians as something draconian, antediluvian, medieval. While in prison, the investigators discover, also thanks to the testimony of Mario Chiesa's ex-wife, Laura Serra, that there are bank accounts in Switzerland with billions of lire, a river of money. Chiesa's ex-wife had long since filed a lengthy civil lawsuit to contest what she called the meager alimony payments that Chiesa was giving her and their 14-year-old son. Through that channel, the Swiss channel, a new world opens up. After 5 weeks in prison on March 23, 1992, Mario Chiesa broke the wall of silence. The interrogation lasted more than a week. In exchange for his revelations, Mario Chiesa has the chance to return home under house arrest. From that moment on, it became clear that this was something completely different. The so-called clean hands pool was born. The public prosecutor, Francesco Saverio Borelli, brings together a group of magistrates following the example of 2 already proven working methods. The one that started in Turin at the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s against terrorism, and the one later replicated by Antonino Caponetto in Palermo against the mafia. The Mani Pulite pool, as Antonio Di Pietro would later explain, was a method. They didn't investigate single episodes, but instead took a systematic approach. From a strictly legal point of view, the Mani Pulite investigation was based on the rigorous application of the crimes of corruption, extortion, and illegal financing, all types provided for by the Penal Code. But that's not all. It's not just the judiciary at work. What emerges in the weeks and months that follow is the flood of money, the scandal, and the negative feeling among citizens, also fueled by the role of the media. The media, newspapers, and television news every day present news about the ongoing investigations that are devastating. One by one, they all start to fall. The major parties fall. The major politicians fall. The major entrepreneurs fall. Norberto Bobbio, in this regard, wrote that democracy lives on publicity, but it risks dying when it becomes a spectacle. The turning point comes later. It comes in 1993, the year when the Mani Pulite investigation, and what by then all the newspapers were calling Tangentopoli, reached its peak. Thousands of notices of investigation are issued. High-profile arrests take place. Confessions shake the country to its very foundations. And Raul Gardini commits suicide. These are extremely dramatic events that raise questions about the human dimension of justice, the methods used, and the legitimacy of a certain way of working. One wonders if, in the face of the need to clarify and deliver justice, it is acceptable to basically terrorize the entrepreneur and the politician who, faced with the threat of handcuffs and harsh prison conditions, sometimes breaks down and prefers, in the end, to take his own life. 1993 is also a special year because, driven by what had already happened in 1992, the arrest of Mario Chiesa, the first statements. Also the violent deaths of the magistrates Falconi and Borsellino in the fight against Cosa Nostra. This political system suddenly falls apart. What seemed unthinkable comes true. Paul Ginsberg observes in this regard that the crisis of the so-called First Republic was at the same time moral, political, and social. In 1993, the historic parties, the Christian Democracy, the Socialist Party, the Social Democratic Party, and many others entered into crisis and gradually chose voluntary dissolution. Other parties dissolve, they restructure. The old Italian Communist Party becomes the Democratic Party of the Left. The Democratic Party of the Left, although a faction breaks away and founds communist refoundation. The old MSI, on the other side of the Italian social movement, transforms through the Fiuggi turning point into the National Alliance. From that moment on, a line is drawn. They say the First Republic dies and the Second Republic is born. It's something extremely uncertain because in reality there haven't been any constitutional reforms significant enough to determine a change of republic. It wasn't like the transition in France from the Fourth to the Fifth Republic, that is, from a parliamentary system to a semi-presidential system. In fact, the label has stuck and has become commonly used. Within this phase, we also see the emergence of new entities, such as Forza Italia, the business party, the party of Silvio Berlusconi, which brings together many former Democrazia Cristiana and former Partito Socialista Italiano members. It's no coincidence, and it's also no coincidence that in 1994, in the political elections, Forza Italia became the new party, a party with a relative majority but within a different system, no longer proportional but majoritarian. Why is that? Because it leads to polarization, and it's the epochal changes brought about by Mani Pulite and Tangentopoli that take their course, as they say. Politicians, entrepreneurs, and fixers end up in jail. There are those who talk, those who keep their mouths shut until the end, and those who commit suicide. Yet Tangentopoli leaves the average citizen with a sense of incompleteness. Something is missing. The truth hasn't fully come to light, and this is confirmed many years later. When new corruption investigations emerge, it means that Tangentopoli didn't do everything. It didn't bring everything fully to light. The Mani Pulite team that disbands, and moreover, amid great controversy, with Antonio Di Pietro himself voluntarily taking off his robe in court and leaving. Maybe it didn't succeed in its ultimate goal, which was to close an entire era, a season that actually keeps coming back again and again. How many times, on how many occasions have we heard about other huge, endless bribes, always connected to public works or party funding, even though new laws have been introduced to make the system more transparent, to allow for effective public funding of political parties, by separating them from the perks of various big industrial leaders, or even worse, from bribes. The system has remained in place and keeps resurfacing periodically. One effect, perhaps the worst effect of Tangentopoli, is the citizens' distrust. And it's precisely from that moment that slowly, year after year, a decrease in voter turnout at the polls begins to be recorded because citizens, disappointed, disillusioned, or disgusted by politics, choose not to vote anymore, as if it were a way to put an end to the corruption. Unfortunately, those who adopt this method of protest don't understand that even with a single vote, and I'm speaking literally, it would still be just one vote. Any government would be legitimized to act. Any parliament could continue to legislate, and that's the problem. In the end, not voting isn't the solution, but it's enough to start a period of decline and distrust that continues even today. If we look at the last elections in these past 5 years, we see how the famous 50% threshold no longer exists. We're well below 100% turnout at the polls. And it all started there. It all started with Mani Pulite, with Tangentopoli, with the discovery of the mud, with the discovery of dirty business. Bribes, because bribes, Raffaele, aren't money that just appears under a tree or under a rock. It's citizens' money that entrepreneurs pay to politicians and then pass on to contracts, increasing the costs, always at the taxpayer's expense. That's corruption. That's the word, the key, the password to keep in mind. It's something so deeply rooted that little by little it breaks through and starts to poison society. Tangentopoli remains a historical turning point. It marked the end of an era, but not the beginning of a full moral and institutional regeneration. If anything, it launched a new political phase with new players. However, it left the remnants of the past swept under the rug, and sometimes outside the rug, and it left a heavy legacy, distrust. Tangentopoli remains a fundamental lesson about the fragility of democracies, and it's something that happens whenever legality is sacrificed for the management of power. Rediscovering it today, 34 years after the outbreak of Tangentopoli, means questioning the limits of politics, the role of the judiciary, and above all, the civic consciousness of citizens. On this subject, I want to conclude this video with a quote from a great politician, Piero Calamandrei, who wrote, "Freedom is like air. You realize how valuable it is when it starts to disappear." In the same way, Tangentopoli reminded us how legality is an essential good, but never something that is definitively acquired. I think it's taken for granted as if it's natural, but it's not. And we realize it with every scandal that inevitably happens and comes to light. And every time a scandal is followed by public outrage, people tearing their clothes and politicians acting like children, it's an isolated individual, an isolated case that will never happen again. It's simply a loose cannon. The same words used by Bettino Craxi for Mario Chiesa. When another phrase comes up, the one about the moral issue, then we enter another realm. And you would need to have courage, real courage, to understand that changing the country means changing not just politics, not just the laws. It means changing ourselves, and hopefully for the better. Because in the end, bribes, kickbacks, payoffs, whatever you want to call them, exist for two reasons. Because there is someone who receives them, someone who gladly accepts them, or maybe even asks for them. But also because there is someone who wants to be clever, who wants to cut in line, who wants to win a contract at any cost. If these conditions didn't exist, if there weren't both the corrupt and the corruptors, then maybe it really would be a better society. But to get there, and you certainly can't do it with the snap of your fingers, it takes a long, complex process. A process that requires a full understanding of moral sense, a complete awareness of what civilization is, and also a path of inner analysis. Because unfortunately, that's what's missing in this country. Truly understanding that you learn from a mistake. But what does it lead to if you keep repeating mistakes, even under different labels? Maybe there's a small immediate advantage, but it's a constant impoverishment of the country called Italy, of its citizens, that is, Italians, and of our entire society, which, if it continues like this, will do nothing but destroy itself until it reaches an inevitable end. Thank you very much.